Welcome to Talkin' About It, where we're doing a deep dive into the Lord of the Rings books from two very different perspectives. I'm Evelyn, and I've never read the books.
I'm Robert, and I've read the books too many times to count. Come join us on this adventure.
Hey guys, I'm Evelyn.
And I'm Robert.
And we're talking about it.
Yeah, so we have now stepped into Book 2, which is the second half of the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yes, we have. So we're halfway through the book now. Technically. I love it when we do that and it's not planned.
Planned, yes. So before we get started, I also understand that we have a question.
Yes, we have been given a question posed to us by some of our listeners, specifically Ace767, and we are excited to answer it because it's a pretty cool question. Yeah. Just a reminder, you can always pose questions to us on our Twitter, our Instagram, our Facebook. Listen to the end of the episode for all those links.
So the question is basically, where would we like to live within Middle-earth?
Yes. Did you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. Well, first of all, my real answer would be the Greyhavens.
Okay.
But that's really not a place in Middle-earth. It's like heaven or something like that.
Okay, so it's cheating.
Yes. So I'm kind of torn between two, but for the same reason.
Okay.
Right. So I would like either to be in Tuckborough or Brandy Hall and the Great Smills.
Okay.
Because both of these have huge libraries.
Oh, okay.
Pippin put together a huge library, and so did Merry.
Okay.
So I thought that would be cool to,
to see that.
To see that.
Interesting. I'm also kind of torn between two places. I know which one, if I had to, gun to my head, pick which one I want. And that would be the Misty Mountains, Erebor, in its heyday pre-Smog. I always identify with the dwarves for some reason from The Hobbit. I always really like that whole, living in the mountain and making jewelry and riches and gold and, the whole craftsmanship kind of aspect. I've always really liked that. But I also kind of like Bree.
So it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that you're 4'11.5"
If that was the case, I would want to be a hobbit.
That's too big for a hobbit.
Yeah, I am the right size for a dwarf, that is true. But no, I would also pick Bree because, as was pointed out to me by a few of our listeners, it's a very diverse town where you get a meeting of dwarves and hobbits and humans and even the occasional elf. And that whole unity and coming together, hearing different stories from different races is just really cool to me. But honestly, if I had to pick one, definitely pre-Smog, Misty Mountains. It sounds lit.
It sounds lit.
Yes.
Okay. Well, it sounds lit, but I'm going to throw a little bit of shade your way.
Okay. That was awful. All right.
I was being stupid.
Anyway, so that's our answer.
That's our answer to that question. But yeah, go ahead. If you have any other questions, send them to us. Now, I am going to give a listener warning.
Okay.
So, because of my background, I'm not growing up in any one particular place as a military brat.
Okay.
I tend to pronounce things incorrectly.
Oh, no.
So, just to give our listeners an idea, so that thing that you dry off with after a shower.
Oh, no.
And the thing that you put on the floor with glue.
They're both called...
They're both towels. The same thing with that thing that you write and the thing that you put in a dress to mark it where you need to sew are both pins.
Yeah, so he always pronounces towel and tile the same way, which causes massive confusion in our household. And because of that, hilarity usually ensues.
Right. So there's some things in here that are hard to pronounce anyway.
So we'll see how we do, because I'm dyslexic and I'm pretty sure I got something wrong.
Okay.
So that's our disclaimer.
Just as long as you don't call anything Dumbledore this time.
Or Gryffindor.
All right. So the name of this chapter is Mini Meetings.
Yes.
And that sounds boring as hell.
It did. I was like, well, my first thought was movie time. Are they going to go straight to like talking about everything that's going to be happening, which I thought was going to be boring because we were just going to get a recap of book 1, which we just kind of read.
Right. And the other thing is, I and Jennifer, my wife, and Evelyn's mom, joke about death by meeting.
Yes, you two go to a lot of meetings.
So, but thankfully, that's not what it was.
Correct.
It didn't mean like committee meetings. It meant meeting people.
Yes, which was really nice. So, forgive our constant interruption. We are getting a lot of helicopters overhead. We live probably a good hour outside of DC northwise, and we're right under the helicopter path that the president and a lot of senators and congressmen and dignitaries use going from a military base to DC back and forth. So it can be a little frustrating sometimes, and usually it's not during our recording sessions. We usually record around the same time of day, but there's just a lot of helicopters going on right now, so please forgive us.
Yes, and we will try to pause and resume without losing our rhythm, but
we might lose our train. Said, on to the next chapter, which is called Many Meetings.
Yes. Now, it's interesting because we know that today in the book is October 24th.
Yes, we find that out very soon.
Yes, correct. And we also know that they left the Shire the day after Frodo's birthday, which would be September 23rd.
Right.
So, between leaving the Shire and Frodo waking up...
It's been a month and a day.
It's been a month and a day, yes.
I did note that.
So, what happens? Frodo wakes up, sees Gandalf laying there, and Gandalf says, "You have done so many absurd things, Frodo."
I want to point out real fast, this is one of the few predictions I got right. We don't meet Gandalf again until Rivendell. Frodo wakes up in Rivendell.
Okay.
Just wanted to point that out. I was right. I got one right. Yay me.
But Gandalf doesn't say, "I'm glad to see you. I'm glad to see that you're recovering from your wound. I'm glad you have woke up so we can talk." No. Frodo, you have done some absurd things.
Yes. And I love that about Gandalf. I do. I love that cheek.
I don't know if it's cheek or just old man grumpiness.
But when he says that, Frodo can't really argue with him. And part of that is he is so at peace. And that is the first time he's been at peace since Tom Bombadil's. And probably even before he left the Shire and knew everything that was happening. This is his first time truly at peace for a long time.
Yes. Now, we get a little bit of remembering, and we get a little bit of reminding us about so we get a little bit of remembering and reminding of us that Frodo was beginning to fade.
Yes.
He was beginning to fade away between having put his ring on and being stabbed with that special knife with that point broken off into him.
Right. Gandalf even says he was on the brink of not death, but becoming a rave himself.
Yes. Yes, and technically fading away as a person.
Right. He would no longer be himself, but would be an agent of Mordor.
And we also get a little hint, maybe more than a little hint, that with Gandalf not being with him, some of these things happen because of that.
Yes. The one thing I do like is that, again, I was very concerned that we were going to have just an entire recap of the first book, but Gandalf's like, no, I know of your journey, and he just casually drops mind reading.
Yes.
He just casually drops it, and no one questions it, or Frodo doesn't question it. I questioned it.
Yeah, this is the first.
I just point
time.
that out.
Yeah, it's the first time we heard of that. Wait a minute. If you can read my mind, why are you always asking me stupid questions? Or questions you already know the answer to.
Right? But he's just like, oh, just a little bit of light mind reading. And it's like, excuse me? Can we back up, please? Anyway, as it continues without answering any questions, that I have at least, he starts to answer some of Frodo's questions. Well, he reluctantly answers Frodo's questions. He wants Frodo to rest, but he explains a little bit of what the knife is, again, like we said, and how the tip had broken away in Frodo, and had they waited just a little bit longer, they may not have been able to save him, and Elrond has been by his side, tending to him and healing him.
Right, and also Gandalf tells us, and Frodo, that he was very lucky, because if that would have pierced his heart, he would have faded much, much quicker.
Yes, he was very lucky it was in his shoulder.
We also find out during this time that, if you recall, in the last chapter, when Frodo slips on his ring,
yes,
he no longer sees the riders as these people in black hoods.
Right.
He basically sees that they are a transparent being that wears these robes in order to give themselves a material presence.
Right. And what he sees, like we discussed in the last episode, is much different than their appearance, but we get an explanation for why. But then he asks a great question, another one that I had. So what about the horses?
What about the horses?
So it turns out that in Mordor, there's more than obviously just these mystical, magical beings, but also things like orcs and trolls and everything. But also, they raise these horses to be
around evil things.
Right, to be comfortable around evil things.
Yes.
And, just skipping ahead slightly, we find out that the horses died, and I put a frowny face in my notes.
Okay. So,
even though they're evil, we shouldn't hurt animals.
Well, they're not evil. They are
raised by evil.
Right.
But I feel sad. Anyway.
Right, so now we also hear that Gandalf being delayed, while it might have caused their ruin, it also seemed to be helpful in some strange ways. Frodo, without Gandalf being there, has grown in character.
Yes.
They also, because
it's mentioned that in the Barrows, he showed much courage and strength that Gandalf didn't even think he was possible of possessing.
Okay, so, spoiler alert.
Should I close my ears? Oh wait, I'm gonna edit this, so I'll hear it anyway. Just go.
Okay, so spoiler alert. If you don't want to hear what I'm going to say, just fast forward about 15 seconds. The other important thing is, because they went through the barrels, Pippin has that knife, and that knife is very important much later in the book.
Okay. That wasn't too bad. Alright. In another information dump that results in Gandalf saying something very serious and then moving on without any explanation, he says to Frodo and explains why he wasn't there, which was that he was captured.
Gandalf was captured.
Which I know he doesn't want to freak Frodo out. He even says he wants him to rest and he doesn't want to, like, burden him with all this information. But I'm sorry, that's worrisome to hear. Gandalf, who's this very powerful wizard, got captured.
I was captured, but go to sleep. We'll talk about it later.
As a very anxious person myself, I would not be able to sleep. Even with magical elf peacefulness, I don't think I could sleep. I would have to have him explain himself.
Right.
Which might make me more nervous, but...
But again, with him being captured, some things happened that wouldn't have happened if Gandalf was there, which become very useful later on in the book, in what they have to do or what they're going to do, or they have a resource that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And this is a plot device that Tolkien uses quite often. It's also interesting because we hear Frodo with some bias.
Okay.
Before he was on this trip, he always thought of big people as either kind and stupid or stupid and wicked. And he says that being there at the Prancing Pony kind of sums that up for him.
Okay.
And Gandalf gets on him, was like, if that's all you can think of big people, you haven't met enough, basically.
Yes, right. Which we can make some parallels to what's going on in the world, but I rather just not, because it's a lot.
And Frodo also states something about Strider only being a ranger.
Right. And Gandalf's like, only a ranger? You obviously haven't spent enough time with him either.
Right, because he is part of the fabled men of the West.
Right. We get another sense of these ancient kings.
And then we get a little bit more of an information dump. We find out that Elrond is a master of healing. And this is where we found that the weapons of the enemy are... This is also where we find out that weapons of the enemy are especially dangerous. Not just because they're weapons, but like just a little scratch, or like if the point
they're like
broke
cursed
off and stuff like that.
Yeah. Talk a little louder. You were really low right there.
Okay. And so... Now I'm saying it. And then we get this reckoning that Frodo's had this piece of metal in him for 17 days.
Right.
And we get this sense that, A, if he wasn't a hobbit, these people being very hardy.
Yes.
These people not being corruptible, mostly.
Right.
That no one else would have been able to survive this than perhaps a hobbit.
Yeah, Gandalf even says that even some of the strongest men he knows could not have withstand it like Frodo has, which I think speaks to both hobbits, but also to Frodo as well. Because Frodo, we know, is very unusual for a hobbit. And is very hardy and very... and is willing to take on more challenges rather than just give up and go back to a normal life.
Right. And this is also where we hear that the horses are real.
Yes.
And that there are other things that come out of Mordor.
We learned that the Dark Lord, which I think I accidentally wrote Duck Lord in my notes, which confused me for a half a second. So the Duck Lord is pulling his strength. And that's really bad because he's already really strong.
And we hear something that I don't remember ever reading before.
What was that?
There are werewolves.
How did I miss that?
There are werewolves. And Sauron is even called the Lord of Werewolves.
How did I miss that?
Now,
that's awesome.
So, in the First Age, there was what was called the Isle of Werewolves. Now, werewolves in Tolkien's world is nothing like the werewolves in ours.
Okay.
Werewolves are actually beasts who have been infected or inhabited by a dreadful spirit.
Okay.
There's,
That's neat.
There's some hints in some of the earlier writings and some other things that he put out, that Tolkien put out there, that also states that there's poison in their claws and in their bite. So, like I said, it's not like the werewolves that we think of. It's not like D&D werewolves and movie werewolves.
Okay.
You know, doesn't have anything to do with the moon or changing. These are beasts that are made that way.
Okay.
And that's how they are. There is no changeling factor.
Okay.
And then we're in Rivendell. And Rivendell is currently a safe place. And I like how that's kind of put in there too.
Like,
currently a safe place.
Right. Frodo even questions it, being like, well, the elves, is this safe? Is this actually a good place? He gets anxious for a second, and Gandalf's like, it's okay for now. It'll be the last place to fall, which is both good and bad.
Correct.
Because to me, that says there's the possibility of everywhere else falling.
Right. Now, we start talking about Gryffindor. No. Glorfindel. Then we get a little bit more information about Glorfindel. That he is one of the firstborn elf lords.
Right. We did discuss this slightly in the last chapter. But we learned that he's this great, fantastic elven lord.
Right. And he's the elf lord of a house of princes. So, you know, he's not just an elf lord. He's like an elf lord above a whole bunch of other elf lords.
Right.
Which is interesting to think about it that way. And then we get this little hint that while Gandalf's talking to Frodo has a touch of transparency still.
Okay.
I just thought that was interesting that got thrown in there.
Yeah.
It's something like the werewolves. It's something that you might have quickly overlooked.
See, for the transparency, I did notice that one.
And, well, when Glorfindel gets there, he already knows that the river's going to flood.
Yes.
And so the riders get caught between this fire on the shore that Glorfindel and Strider set, and this flood.
Right. This massive flood.
And it doesn't say anything here, but it makes me wonder if there isn't something about those two elements being against evil.
Okay.
Because, you know, water, you wash it away. I'm going to let my pastor show up. Water is a symbol of baptism. Walking out of water is a symbol of surviving chaos. Fire is used to refine things. Fire is used to cook off all the impurities in silver and gold.
Okay.
And so they're associated mostly with good things, because fire is also light. So I wonder if I tried to look it up, and I was wondering if that was in the back of Tolkien's mind when he did it, and if it was so deeply ingrained in him that he didn't think he had to explain it anywhere else.
Okay.
All right?
Knowing how he is with symbolism, I buy it.
Yeah.
Totally.
We also find out that 3 of the writers were carried away.
Right.
Okay. And the other 6 the horses
went mad.
They-
and we know they went mad in the last chapter, but we don't know why they went mad. So now we learn why they went crazy.
Right. They threw off their masters.
Yes, and leaped into the river.
Leaped into the river to get away from everything else.
Right.
And so we have now the riders have been swept away.
But so were the horses.
The riders have been swept away for a while.
But so were the horses.
And so were the horses.
Frowny face.
And then we get off that topic.
But there is something that
Okay.
There is something that Gandalf says when he is talking to Frodo about all these terrible things. And he says, quote, "We must keep our courage."
Yes.
And I loved that. I really liked that quote.
And then we get to where they're at, in Rivendell.
Right.
So they're not just in Rivendell. They're in what's called the last homely house. This is the last homely house east of the sea, which, if you remember right, the elves crossed the sea to the Grey Havens, which is like a heaven area.
Right.
The elves came from and will return to the Grey Havens that's east of the sea, which is heaven-like.
Okay.
And Bilbo previously has referred to it as the perfect house.
Yes. He does recall what Bilbo says about the entire thing.
Now, right here, we're going to have a little production meeting that you get to listen to.
Okay.
So, there's a lot of stuff and other writings about Elrond and Rivendell.
Yes. There's a lot of information dumped in this chapter alone, let alone other information from other sources.
So I thought maybe later on we can do a bonus chapter about all that background information about Elrond and Rivendell.
Okay.
All right? So look forward to hearing that.
So we'll probably do a patron exclusive bonus episode that incorporates everything, and then later on we'll probably release a shorter version of that bonus episode to hear for everyone to listen to.
And so, see, now you got me doing it.
I noticed.
Frodo falls back to sleep.
Back to our regularly scheduled podcast.
Frodo falls back to sleep.
Yes, he needs to sleep.
And
Poor baby.
And when he wakes up, he finds clothes of green sitting there folded up waiting for him.
Yes.
And I like the idea of it being green. There's something elfish about that. There's something that connects him to nature about that.
Something that I noticed is it's just, to me, I've always associated green clothing with adventurers, with people who have a cause, an adventure to go on, a mission. If you look at a lot of other stories and such, you see the main character, the main adventurer, wearing green a lot. And it has a lot of symbolism in itself.
Right. And then there is something a little bit... Then there was something that I caught that I don't ever remember catching before.
Okay.
That it seems that this last homely house is a TARDIS.
Okay.
It seems to be bigger on the inside than the outside.
Huh. Okay.
So there a little bit of elven magic, interrupting space.
Okay. I can dig it.
Which I thought was interesting, especially since I had never focused on that before. Or really picked it up as something else.
Okay. But it's Sam who greets him.
It's Sam who greets him. And Sam is excited about having been in this place.
Right.
And what's really interesting is how the place is described is very close to Tolkien's painting of Rivendell.
Which we'll link in our Instagram and Twitter. And Facebook.
Yeah, we'll link the picture to it. And so that's very interesting. That of all these other little things Tolkien changed or added to or subtracted to, it really, this image of Rivendell stays the same.
And it was really interesting hearing Sam describe it, because he says that he's been waiting on Frodo and making sure he's okay, but he so badly wants to go and see the elves, listen to them, watch them, learn from them. So Frodo's like, yes, let's go do it. I know how badly you want to learn from them. Let's go. So they go to this banquet, and Sam wants to... Sorry, I missed something. So as they're going around Rivendell, they run into Merry and Pippin. And Pippin gives me a great laugh here. He basically teases Gandalf, where Gandalf is basically saying that he needs to cool it and he needs to rein himself in. And Pippin's like, he's hilarious, isn't he? Like, kind of joking that Gandalf is joking. And I just... Oh, Gandalf and Pippin. I can't wait to see where this goes.
But why does Gandalf warn him, though? Because he goes, noble cousin, Lord of the Ring!
Oh, that is true. Yeah, he does do that. And everyone's like, yo, you gotta stop that.
Nix on the Lord of the Ring.
We don't talk about that stuff here.
We don't talk about it at all.
It's bad juju. We're not doing it.
Now, what's really interesting also is that it's noted that the climate here is always the same.
Okay.
And that is because Elrond wears one of the rings made for the elves.
Oh, okay.
What's the queen's name? Gladriel? And another elf that we will run into later, I won't give a spoiler, I'll just let you know that one of the elves that we run into later also wears one of the rings.
Ooh, so I can try to predict which one.
Yes, you can.
Sounds good.
But Elrond is able to control the climate here.
Okay.
Where it stays pleasant all the time.
That's nice. So... It's now time... I got it. It's now time for the banquet. And Sam wants to serve Frodo, but Gandalf is like, no. And the elves are like, no. You are one of our honored guests. You will be at attendance as one of the honored guests. And he's like, all right then, I guess. So they go and they sit, and Frodo sees Gandalf and Glorfindel sitting on either side of Elrond. And this is our first time that we really see Gandalf in all his glory, where he's shown, even though he's not as tall as the elves, he is this magnificent figure, this wise master. And that's very... And that contrasts deeply with what we have seen of him before. As we know and as we have discussed in the Hobbit town in Shire, that he's just this troublemaker. He's this vagabond wanderer. He's just this normal guy with fireworks. And yet here, he is revered. And this is our first time really seeing that side of him. Not this chill dude that kind of just hangs out with Frodo smoking his pipe, which even earlier in this chapter is what he's doing, but this refined figure.
Right. And this is also the first time that the hobbits in we get a glimpse of Arwen.
Yes.
Now, Arwen, they call her the Even Star as well.
No, they don't. They call it the Evening Star.
Pause.
You said even.
I know.
Okay.
And this is where the hobbits and we finally meet Arwen, the Even Star.
Right.
Now, Even Star hints at Evening Star, but the name translates differently.
Okay. Now, when we see her, Frodo says that she looks very alike to Elrond and assumes that she is a kin of his. And then the book clarifies, the narrator clarifies for the reader that she is in fact Elrond's daughter.
Right. And in Elvish, her name means noble maiden.
Okay.
But there's also a Welsh word. It's not spelled the same way, but it's pronounced very much the same way, which means greatly blessed.
Okay.
So, and for me, the name Evenstar hints as Arwen being maybe the last elf born of high rank. Because the Evenstar usually, the Evenstar, the evening star, usually refers to the end of the day.
Oh, okay.
And I should say not just the last elf of high rank, the last of high rank. I should correct myself and just say, the last elf of high rank born in Middle Earth.
Okay.
And then they sit down for dinner.
Yes. And Frodo is loving the food. He loves the food so much that he doesn't notice a certain person sitting next to him.
And who was that certain person?
It was Glowin.
It was Glowin.
If you don't know who Glowin is, you have not read The Hobbit. He was one of Bilbo's companions during The Hobbit's adventure.
Correct.
And I squealed. I did, because if you heard our introductory episode, I gushed about my love for The Hobbit, how even though I've never read Lord of the Rings, I've read The Hobbit realistically probably 20-ish times. I adore it. I adore the animated movie. I even tolerate the live action movie, the first one, which was good, the other two, but I love The Hobbit. I love the dwarves. As I gushed about earlier, I love dwarves. So seeing him was awesome. And then we basically get an information dump that was kind of like a sequel and like an epilogue almost to The Hobbit. And I appreciated that.
I did too. We got caught up with an update on what's happening with the Dwarven Kingdom.
Right.
And we're not going to talk about that here because that can almost be another bonus episode.
That could easily be a bonus episode. Actually, I like that as a bonus episode. Let's do it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, we'll do that eventually as well. But, yeah, also, this is starting to turn into an actual long episode with just one chapter, which we haven't done in a while, so we should probably keep moving. And either that or it's all our mistakes.
And then we go to find some elvish minstrels.
But wait, I did want to say what brought Golan here.
Oh, okay.
So while we won't go into the entire epilogue, we'll do a bonus episode about that later. We do find that the reason that Glowin is in Rivendell is because several of the Dwarven companions, especially Balin, has disappeared. They wandered off and haven't been heard from since. But he says, let's not talk of such things now. Let's have a good night.
Let's have a good night. So they go walk into a room where the elvish minstrels are starting to set up. This is the Hall of Fire. There's always a fire burning in here. It's mostly the same, only light. It's mostly the only light in here. It's kind of a warm area to sit in. warm not just physically but even mentally to just go in and story tell and listen to stories.
Okay, that sounds lovely.
And as they walk in, they see what to me is described. As they walk into this room, we are told that there's a figure sitting on a stool with his back against a pillar, slumped over with a piece of bread and his cup.
Yes.
Sounds like an old drunk.
Yeah, just asleep.
But we find out it's Bilbo.
Yes, which they say, hey man, wake up. And he's like, I wasn't asleep, I was thinking. I'm trying to write a song here, people. Because that's what we need. More songs.
Yay! Again, not to get into the song and making this a longer episode already. So we'll do a bonus episode on this song.
Right, that was one of the things we said that we would do a bonus episode about.
But this song has many, many beginnings for Tolkien. And it's even published earlier in a different setting.
Okay.
With it being a little different.
Okay. Something that I really liked is that we see Strider again. But Bilbo says, where is my friend Dunandon? Which translates to Man of the West, which is Strider. And Bilbo even says to him, Strider, that's a new one. How many names do you even go by anyway? And Strider just laughs it off. Right. So I'm going to guess that we're going to hear even more names from him.
Right. And then one of the things that we get is Bilbo wants to see the ring.
Yes. He and Frodo are catching up, and Bilbo wants to see the ring. It has been decades. I want to point this out. It has been decades since Bilbo has seen Frodo or the ring. He has been away from the ring for so long. And yet in this moment, when he reaches out to grab it, he turns wrinkly and freaky and old and shriveled. And it scares Frodo. And to me, it was very reminiscent to how Gollum was described. And so we see that effect of the ring starting to really corrupt So we see that really starting to affect and corrupt Bilbo, which makes me worry about Frodo with this is starting to turn into a really long journey. Like, if this is... We just got to Rivendell. It is half a book, and we just got to Rivendell. I know that this is going to be a really long journey. I am starting to get worried about how Frodo will react. I know from the animated movies, like, Frodo of the Nine Fingers, because he's like, mine, and Gollum, like, bites it off and stuff. Spoilers, but, like, I don't know why, so...
But we also find out that the ring is on a new chain, and now it's around his neck.
Yes.
So, and what that means to me, it gives the image of it being a burden now. It gives me the image that a yoke of an oxen has been placed upon him now.
Okay.
It's just not a trinket in his pocket anymore. It's a ring around his neck, like it's a burden.
Almost like a collar, too.
Right.
Which dubs him as the ring bearer, the Lord of the Ring, as Pippin says earlier.
Correct. And now while Strider goes off to help Bilbo finish the song, we start to hear Elven singing.
Yes. And during that singing, Frodo becomes almost entranced. Or he does become entranced.
Right. These songs are enhancing. No, sorry. These songs are enchanting.
Yes.
And as you listen, they tend to be dreamlike even.
Yes.
And then we have Bilbo's song.
Right.
Which I'm not going to get into, since we already said we're going to do a bonus episode. But I will add real fast here.
Well, why don't you give us just the gist of it? What's the basic summary in a couple sentences?
Okay, so Tolkien first started this song back in the 1930s.
Okay.
And it goes on, and then even 1962, he publishes it in The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. But differently as well.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot of scholars who get kind of uppity about this.
Mm-hmm.
About, get on to Tolkien about, if a real scholar wouldn't do that, a real scholar would write it down and da-da-da-da-da.
You need to take a shot. You said Tolkien instead of talking. You did. You said Tolkien instead of talking. Just like our podcast name.
We'll keep it in.
Sorry, I just thought it was funny.
But Tolkien is also a storyteller.
Yes.
And how many times does a storyteller change their story a little bit because of the audience? Or even better yet, how many times does a story change when it's told by another person?
Like your Joan Jett story.
Like my Joan Jett story.
Which we are not going to do because I have heard it so many times. Maybe that'll be a Patreon exclusive.
If you want to hear my Joan Jett story, ask.
You don't want to ask. Anyway. So Bilbo sings the song, and go ahead and give a quick summary of what the song's about.
Well, the song is about a traveler.
Okay.
Back during the First Age.
Okay.
And that's really all I'm going to say now.
Okay.
But do read it.
Yes.
I will admit, the very first time I read this book, if a song was more than 3 verses, I skipped over it.
I was so tempted to skip over it. I saw how long it was. It spanned over like 2 pages. I'm like, excuse me?
Right.
But I read it.
And this one gives us some background information. So
right.
It's kind of important to listen to for further on. But here, after Bilbo tells it or sings it, he asks them, "So, can you tell which parts I wrote and which parts Strider wrote?"
And the elves are like, nah.
And the elves say, we can't tell the difference between Hobbit and a human. And
we get a repeat of what Gandalf said from Bilbo, where you guys obviously haven't spent enough time around us and you have your own biases.
And Bilbo's answer is, if you can't tell the difference between man and a hobbit, your judgment's pretty poor anyway.
Right.
What shade.
Love it. Love it.
And actually what we hear is that the only thing that Strider really added was about a green stone. Yes. Which again, Strider says is important, and we know that he told the hobbits about the stone earlier in the last chapter, about this green stone being important, but he doesn't explain why it's important. Right, and it's an emerald, and we will hear later on in chapter 5 of book 2 about.
Oh, okay.
So we hear more about the stone coming up. So, no. And the evening is winding down for the hobbits.
Yes.
Sam is asleep with a smile on his face. Elrond begins a song. We see Aragorn for the first time as a noble and regal figure here.
Right. And we see him by Arwen, and that gives us more of a hint to what he meant by his heart being in Rivendell. It's the first time we see him vulnerable, I guess.
Right. And Frodo and Bilbo go off to safely talk and not be disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read that, you think, oh, secrets are going to be exchanged. But no, they go off to talk about fair things that they have seen and avoid talking about dark shadows and other such they avoid talking about dark shadows and other critters that crawl around at night.
Yeah.
And that sums up that chapter.
It does. That was a nice meaty chapter. We haven't had a good meaty chapter besides the last chapter, in a while.
Correct. Now, we're at the point where Evelyn...
Will we talk about what we think first? We talk about our impressions of the chapter. So that was a really meaty chapter. And I appreciated that because we haven't had one in a while. It was difficult when we were getting meaty chapter after meaty chapter, but having a meaty chapter after such a plot-heavy couple of chapters was a nice change of pace.
Yes, and I like the idea that we're finally at a place where they can gather, rest, collaborate, and figure out what the heck they're going to do next.
Right. And I really like that it's a peaceful moment for our hobbits that they haven't had since Tom Bombadil.
Right. And while the other hobbits have already been partaking of it for 3 days and 4 nights, because that's how long
Frodo was
out of it. Because when he's trying to reckon how it's October 24th, he's like, I have it as being the 21st. And Gandalf says, no.
You've been out a while.
You've been out of it. So they've already been partaking of this singing and this food a little bit. Sam has been by his side most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so has Bilbo.
Yes.
But this is finally a time for Frodo to have some comforts of home.
Yes.
Food, friends, singing.
And a nice bed.
And a nice bed. That's always nice.
Yes. Very restful.
Very restful. Now, we ready to move on?
We are.
What is the name of our next chapter?
The Council of Elrond.
The Council of Elrond. So, besides there being a council meeting, what are your predictions?
So besides a council meeting, am I allowed to predict it'll be like the movie?
What about like the movie?
Like, they'll all gather and discuss what's happening in Mordor and what's going on with the ring and sending out the group of people that turn out to be called the Fellowship of the Ring. And then they have that, like, brilliant shot of them all standing together in portrait-like because that's totally natural.
One simply does not walk into Mordor.
Ooh, can I predict that's going to be an actual quote in the book?
You can predict that.
Okay, so Sean Bean will actually say... I don't know his character's name. If you could see my father's face right now. The disappointment. The sheer disappointment. So Sean Bean's character will say that exact quote. Will have the Fellowship of the Ring being contrived. And I need one more.
One more? Why do you need one more?
I do 3.
Okay. Give us a third one.
I don't know what to predict.
Predict something.
And they're all going to have a lovely time.
Because while reading this, I realized how little I actually remember from the movies. And I don't think I remember anything except a couple scenes, and I don't even know which movies they're from at this point.
Okay.
So I'm really in the dark here.
I've been Robert.
And I've been Evelyn.
And you've been listening to Talking About It.
See you next time.
Thank you so much for listening. I have been Robert.
And I have been Evelyn.
Podcasters are Robert and Evelyn Lewis.
Edited by Evelyn Lewis.
Produced by Robert Lewis, Evelyn Lewis, Regina, and Comic Canary.
Music provided by Ben Sound. Link in the description.
Support us on Patreon at Talking About It Podcast.
Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Talking About It.
And Twitter at TokenPod.
Thank you all again for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.